You want to know which running backs you can trust to start in your fantasy football lineups for Week 6? Stick around and we'll let you know. Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Pierre, he's Chris. We're here to give you our advice for running backs to start or sit heading into Week 6. Now don't forget, this week we do have some teams on bye. The Lions, Titans, Texans, and Raiders will be off. Before we go game by game and break it down, let's talk about those running backs that should be in your lineup no matter what. Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, and Jonathan Taylor if he plays. All right, Chris, let's start as we do with the first game of the week. That is Thursday night. A matchup, dare I say, may not be the best of the week or the season. That's the Commanders taking on the Bears. Let's start with the running attack. This one is interesting, though. Brian Robinson made his debut last week. How do you feel he might do now his second week of action?
I mean, I'm sure he'll do better. I'm sure he'll play more. But even in a great matchup like this against the Bears, I can't consider him more than anything other than like a desperate flex play. I mean, only 9 carries last week. Didn't play a ton of snaps. So even if that increases a bit, just not a lot of upside here yet for Brian Robinson, so just a desperation flex.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. Because of the buys, because injuries keep happening to running backs, and I do think he will be more involved. I think he could be played. He's really not more than an RB3 at this point. He didn't get a ton of touches, like you said, but I think it's just a matter of time. It's coming. The takeover will happen, but don't rush to put him in your lineup. So he's usable, but again, that's only if you really don't have anything better going for you. Antonio Gibson, do you feel he takes a step back again this week?
Yeah, you can't start Antonio Gibson. I don't care how good the matchup is. Barely touched the ball last week, and it's only going to get worse not starting Gibson in any format.
Yeah, look, the joke is that, he's introducing himself to the special teams unit because that's where he's headed. It might not be too far from the truth. At this point, no, you can't start Gibson. Hopefully you traded him if you did have him. You definitely should look elsewhere. And now on the other side, the Bears, David Montgomery did play and looked really good. How do you feel about him in this matchup?
Got to feel good about David Montgomery. I mean, he's pretty much an every week RB2, but this week, plenty of upside going against this defense, so must start David Montgomery.
Yeah, he's, to me, must start. Really solid RB2. He maybe will never have the highest ceiling out of all these running backs because he's on the Bears, but he's looked really good this year. I think he's looked quicker than he has in past years. And Khalil Herbert just isn't a factor when Montgomery's healthy. So Montgomery, to me, is a must start. And then, kind of like I just said, to me, Khalil Herbert, as long as Monty's out there, you just really can't consider him.
Yeah, 4 touches last week, barely played any snaps. You can't start Herbert.
49ers going to take on the Falcons this week. Jeff Wilson looked really good. Maybe I haven't been giving him enough credit so far, but how do you feel about him? Is he kind of must-start territory?
I think so, and especially this week in this matchup. One thing about the Falcons, they're bad all over on defense, but they're a little bit better against the pass than the run. They're terrible against the run. Jeff Wilson getting tons of touches. I think you've got to start Jeff Wilson this week.
Yeah, against the Falcons, definitely need to do that. And so Jeff Wilson looking like a strong start. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Tevin Coleman, he's back. He's with his 49ers again. He scored twice, and all of a sudden he's made an appearance. He got some yardage. So much for Jordan Mason. But anyways, is Tevin Coleman a guy you consider based on the matchup? Hey, there's also a revenge game factor here.
Yeah. Again, kind of like Brian Robinson, just because of the matchup, I'm going to say desperation flex if you need them because, the 49ers, this shouldn't be a game where the 49ers are losing and having to throw. They should have no problem running the ball as much as they want. So, desperation flex only because of the matchup.
Look, some of you are at that point, right? You lost Javonte, Penny, whoever else at running back, buys, Derrick Henry out. Maybe you throw out Tevin Coleman. Obviously, it's not the worst pick, but again, you'd have to be at that point to do it. But you can't say never. What about Tyler Algier? Can you say no to what should be the lead running back? Who even knows who the lead running back is for Atlanta these days? But let's just start with Algier. He's probably the only one people are even considering.
Yeah, I can't start Tyler Algier. There's just very little upside here in this offense against a tough 49ers run defense. Just I mean, he's got to fall in the end zone just to give you anything, honestly. So, no, I can't start Algier.
No, I have no interest, again, in any of these Falcons running backs. Algier is probably the guy people think will do the best, but I'll just take a hard pass. 49ers, they have some injuries in the secondary, but their run defense is still pretty solid, so no thanks. All right, Patriots are going to take on the Browns. Maybe not a score fest in store, but there should definitely be a lot of yards on the ground. Now let's start with Ramondre Stevenson. Chris, you called a boom last week, and he did, but does he do it again?
Either way, I'm starting Ramondre. This Browns run defense looking horrendous, looking really bad, giving up huge plays. Ramondre looks great. If you got Ramondre, you have to roll him out again.
I agree. We, have kind of been waiting for Ramondre to take at least a slight upper hand in this backfield. Well, he got to do it injury, but I don't think he lets go. Ramondre looking like a really solid start, especially this week. Now, we know Chubb is just killing it this year. You're starting him. How about Kareem Hunt?
Yeah, I mean, Kareem Hunt's always what he is, right? Like a borderline low-end RB2 with a decent amount of upside because he's getting, Chubb scoring all the touchdowns. That's what everybody's seeing. But what people aren't seeing is that Kareem Hunt is getting a ton of chances to score touchdowns as well. In fact, Kareem Hunt leads all running backs in red zone touches this year. So, no, he hasn't hit pay dirt as much as Nick Chubb so far. But, as an RB2, I think he's a fine start.
I'm going to have to say no to Kareem Hunt because it's like I feel like he is getting the opportunity. You're right there. But I just don't feel like it's happening because Chubb has been so good. And look, this matchup is really tough. Patriots have been statistically one of the top 5 defenses against running backs so far. Don't feel like this is going to be a big scoring game here. So I'm going to look elsewhere. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to start some of the, like Tevin Coleman over Kareem Hunt. But yeah, Hunt is really going to be more of a desperation flex for me. Jets going to take on the Packers. Let's see if they can keep their mojo going at Lambeau Field. And this is an opportunity for us to talk about Breece Hall.
Yeah, you got to start Breece Hall. From now until the end of the season, pretty much. He's in every week, has to be in your lineup, running back. I mean, it's not going to be long before he's going to be up there with those must-start guys regardless of matchup. But Packers, one thing about the Packers is, yeah, they're good against the pass, but they're a little weaker against the run. I think there'll be plenty of chances here for Breece Hall. Got to start him.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early for us to throw him in the no doubt must start top 10 territory, but look, another game like last week and it'll happen. I mean, maybe he doesn't roll up quite as much yardage. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. You have to start Breece Hall if you have him, and if you bottle on him, congratulations. So what does this mean for Michael Carter? Because obviously Hall taking the reins here, but then Michael Carter playing the role of vulture scored twice last week. Does that make him fantasy relevant still?
I mean, barely. He's really touchdown dependent. He's one of these guys that has to just fall into the end zone, not really getting the usage to make him startable. So I don't feel like that's going to happen this week. Not as good of a matchup. So I'm going to say no to Michael Carter.
Yeah, I think at this point he's really just a handcuff basically to Breece Hall and somebody you can stash but not start. I mean, he'd need, like you said, either touchdown or catch several passes because of game script. I'm not counting on that, so I will pass this week too. All right, now let's talk about that tandem in Green Bay. Start with Aaron Jones. Been looking better and better. How do you feel he does against the Jets?
I mean, you got to feel fairly good. This isn't the Jets' defense of the past. It just, gets destroyed by running backs, but it's still not a defense you have to be, completely scared off by. So I think Aaron Jones is a solid start.
Well, look, Raheem Mostert just put up over 100 yards on this Jets team, even though they were losing and wound up getting blown out. Aaron Jones is a better version of Raheem Mostert. To me, I'm definitely starting Aaron Jones in this matchup. A.J. Dillon, yes, let me down. I know. But does he have some hope because it's the Jets?
I mean, I'd like to say yes, but at this point, I mean, I don't know. I can't trust A.J. Dillon in my lineup this week. I can't trust him only getting 6 touches like he got last week. If Aaron Jones has really pulled away, I don't want A.J. Dillon in my lineup. So as tough as it is, I'm going to say no to A.J. Dillon.
Dillon, I mean, he always has some upside to score. I feel like this is a good matchup, so not a must start by any means, but I feel like you can. He's, flex worthy play. I think better days will come. Like nobody saw the Giants doing what they did last week. So Dillon is still kind of just there for me. All right, Jaguars taking on the Colts. Now, here's an interesting backfield. I want to know your thoughts on the James Robinson versus Travis Etienne situation. We were all ready to completely write off Etienne, and all of a sudden, maybe he's the lead back. So, what about Robinson? I mean, do you think that Achilles is actually catching up with him now? He looked great in the first couple of weeks, but not so much last week.
Yeah, you got to be pretty concerned about James Robinson. I think we kind of, I don't want to dive too much into it because we got a lot of running backs to talk about here, and I do talk about it in our buy low video, but I think we kind of overlooked that he wasn't really that good early on. He was just getting good volume, scoring touchdowns, and he did have some nice, decent runs. But we're starting to see the last 2 weeks Etienne taking over. I mean, the Colts aren't a great defense, but it's not like teams are just running wild on them. I get it. Like, to me, James Robinson this week is just a flex start. That's it, a flex start.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he could still score because they use him to the goal line, but you got to wonder now if all of a sudden the toll, that these carries are taking on him. Maybe they pushed him too hard too soon, too many carries early in the season. It's possible. So I'm really curious to see what he does this week. So I think you can start him, but I'm not rolling him out no matter what. And then your thoughts on Travis Etienne? You felt good about him preseason. You feeling better now?
I mean, I'm definitely feeling better, but I'm not ready to just say, yeah, put him in your lineup. It's going to be great. Again, it's not like Etienne is pulled away, like Breece Hall pulled away from Michael Carter. This is still a split. Etienne's looked better, sure, but he hasn't pulled away. So again, I'm just going to say Etienne, more of a flex start.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm ready to go that far. I mean, he doesn't need a ton of touches. We know the speed, the explosiveness. I find it hard to trust a Doug Peterson backfield, and now we're seeing why. So I'll say you could flex him this week because of buys and such, but I'm not there yet. I'm not sold yet. And then we know JT, look, if he plays, of course, there's no question there. Here's a big question mark. Is Nyheim Hines going to play after being in concussion protocol? And if he does, do you play him, let's say, if JT doesn't play?
Yeah, if JT doesn't play, I think Nyheim Hines is a fine start. Not a tough run defense. And it's hard to say because it was early in that game, but it looked like Nyheim Hines was going to get a decent amount of run in that game last week before he got concussed. So I think if Hines plays and JT doesn't, Nyheim Hines is a very good start this week.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like Frank Reich was trying to go out of his way to prove that what he said was true when he said you should draft Nyheim Hines. It's like he was making a point just to get him the ball. So if Taylor doesn't play, then yeah, I think you can go with Hines. But again, I'm not going to force him into my lineup. So he's a flex if needed. Minnesota against Miami. So let's start with Dalvin Cook coming off a huge game. You called that as a boom as well. Now, I know that this might be a good time to sell high on him, but if you do still have him, I mean, you've got to start him, I assume.
Yeah, you should still feel good about him in this matchup against Miami. Not a defense to worry about. I do worry that, he's not going to get 2 goal line, walk-in touchdowns again, but still a solid start.
Yeah, at this point, Dalvin Cook is clearly running well. Injury's not bothering him. I think you got to roll him out, especially the way Miami's defense has played lately. And on the Miami side, Raheem Mostert, I guess it's just his backfield now. But is he a no doubt must start?
I wouldn't say no doubt, but I think he's a solid RB2 start this week. Again, Vikings defense shouldn't scare you at all. And if Mostert's going to get this level of touches, we know, his potential. So solid start this week.
I agree. Solid. I mean, not going to expect another 100-yard game, but at this point, who knows? If they're still backup quarterback, maybe the receivers are hurt still. Chase Edmonds I don't even know what happened to him. He's just disappeared. He just doesn't exist anymore. So it's just Mostert or bust. So I'll say he's a solid start too. Bengals going to New Orleans to take on the Saints. You're starting Joe Mixon, despite how inefficient he's been. You don't question that. You start Mixon. What about Kamara? Do you think he's inching his way back to must-start territory?
I can't go that far. It'll help. Olave almost certainly going to be out. Landry we don't know about. It'll help if it's Dalton again. But the Bengals have been a good run defense this year. They improved that part of their defense, and they've been very good. They were actually good down the stretch last year too. So I'm not going to say sit Kamara. I'm just going to say a good start.
Yeah, it's not a great matchup per se, but again, there's so many injuries there at wide receiver and quarterback, and Kamara's the kind of guy who doesn't need to do it just on the ground, because actually he's better at being a receiver than a runner, just straight handoff. So I think you almost have to start Kamara at this point. Ravens taking on the Giants. Well, J.K. Dobbins didn't do a whole lot last week, despite the fact that they have a lot of injuries at receiver. Do you think he gets it going against these surprisingly 4-1 Giants?
No. He played less snaps last week than he did the week before with Justice Hill out. Kenyon Drake getting snaps, Mike Davis getting snaps, Devin Duvernay getting snaps out of the backfield. No, I'm not playing J.K. Dobbins. I fell for that trap. I got burned. I'm done. Not playing J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, I should have known. Maybe I was a little too optimistic there with Dobbins. So I think you can start him because, he always has touchdown upside because once they get near the goal line, they do like to feed him the ball. But, man, the Giants might be for real. At least on defense, they're pretty stout. So I don't think you have to start Dobbins, but you could roll him out. Bucks and Steelers. Okay, you're starting Lenny, and last week showed you why. What about Rachaad White? Does he interest you in this matchup?
No, I can't. I know he's my guy, but I mean, he played 40% of the snaps, which is nice, but he's going to be more of a guy that you're going to want to play when they're coming from behind, having to throw the ball a ton, and the Steelers aren't going to force the Bucks to have to throw the ball a ton. So I think this is another Lenny week. I got to sit my boy Rachaad White this week.
Yeah, his time will come, but this is not the type of matchup that favors him, so I agree. You can keep him on your bench. Don't drop him, but don't start him either. And then, well, we got to talk about Najee Harris. I mean, we pretty much said you had to sit him last week, and hopefully you did. What about this week? Does it get any better? This matchup is almost worse.
No, not going to get any better this week. You got to sit Najee Harris. Yeah, got to sit him. Have to.
Yeah, Tampa Bay actually with a better run defense straight up than Buffalo. I mean, this is where we're at. You can't start Najee. Like, maybe things will get better, but not this week. Panthers going to take on the Rams. Matt Rule is finally gone. Maybe that'll free CMC to be what he's supposed to be. But you start him no matter what. On the Rams side, I almost feel like you can't start either of these guys no matter what. I mean, Cam Akers, any hope for him?
No hope. Touchdown or bust. Can't start him.
Yeah, sadly, I'm going to have to agree. This whole offense is just kind of a disaster. So sit Cam Akers and pretty safely sit Darrell Henderson.
Yes, got 0 carries last week. You can sit Darrell Henderson.
Cardinals going to Seattle to take on the surprising Seahawks. Now in Arizona, James Conner has a rib injury, so not sure what his status will be. If James Conner does go, do you put him in your lineup?
I mean, you have to, right? This matchup's just too good. If there's ever going to be a time where James Conner was finally going to do something this year, this would be the matchup. So I think if Conner plays, you got to start him.
I'm surprised to hear the optimism there. I'll say you can start him, but Conner really hasn't done anything this year to show that he is a must-start at any point. I'm down on this Arizona offense in general. If he's banged up, you never know. Might leave the game early. I think he's a risky start. You can start him, but I would be very hesitant to. If James Conner doesn't go, it's probably going to be Eno Benjamin because, well, the other backup, Darrell Williams, he has knee injury as well. So let's say it's just Eno Benjamin, the backfield to himself. You put him in your lineup?
Yeah, if I'm going to say you got to start Conner, then I've got to say you got to start Eno because this Seahawks defense is so bad that I don't even care what kind of running back Eno Benjamin is. He's good enough to score fantasy points against his defense. So I'm starting him if Conner is out. Yeah,
I mean, Benjamin might be a safer start than Conner to me because he has right now no injury designation. He's fresher. But still, I'm not going to say no doubt must start, but I think he could be a solid start if the backfield is all his. And then on the Seattle side, well, it's Kenneth Walker time. So you saw what he did last week, only a few carries, but he ripped off a 69-yard touchdown run against Arizona. Do you just plug and play?
I think you got it. You got to start him this week. It's a great matchup. Must start Ken Walker.
You know I'm a Walker fan. Absolutely must start because he definitely has the backfield to himself. I know DJ Dallas might come in on passing downs once in a while. Whatever. That shouldn't worry you. The Seahawks have barely been throwing it to running backs anyways. Kenneth Walker, if you grabbed him or if you had him already before waivers, again, congrats. You got to start him. Bills taking on the Chiefs. It's probably going to be about the aerial attack, not the ground game. But if you have Devin Singletary, does he interest you?
Not really. I mean, with the bye weeks and things, you can flex him if you need him, but not really a guy I feel great about.
Yeah, I thought he'd get more involved last week than he did. But he's always the kind of that guy, right? He can get you a few points. Maybe he'll score. So you can flex him, but that's kind of it. What about CEH? Tough matchup, but do you trust him?
Tough matchup, but I don't think you could sit CEH. Just has so much touchdown upside right now, and getting involved in all sorts of ways. Not the best matchup, not a must start, but I'm going to say still a guy like a good start.
Exactly. I think that's kind of where he's going to be all year, right? It's really hard to sit him because you know what he could do, but you don't necessarily expect him to go off. But yeah, you got CEH, you kind of should start him. Division rivals in the NFC East, you got the Cowboys taking on the Eagles. This will be an important one. But for fantasy, how do you feel about Ezekiel Elliott?
Terrible. I mean, 22 carries last week, 78 yards. Like, what are we doing here? What are the Cowboys doing? Pollard ripping off huge runs, looking explosive, and they're feeding dusty Zeke 22 carries. Not starting Zeke, no.
Not starting Zeke either. Will be a little bit tougher matchup as well. But what about Tony Pollard? He had that touchdown run. Does look pretty good. Do you feel like he could do something against Philly?
I mean, it's a tough spot, so I can't say, definitely start Tony Pollard. But I think if you need him as a flex, we know, look, he can hit a home run at any time. He's got that explosive ability. So I think if you need him, you can start him.
Yeah, not giving us that floor in PPR because he's not catching as many passes as we expected. But like you said, he can always make that big play. So he's always kind of in that flex range. And then Miles Sanders, who knows what we'll get this week. What's your prediction?
I mean, it seems like every other week he does nothing and then he goes off. So he did nothing last week. I guess he's going to go off. But no, I mean, Sanders is what he is. He's a fine start every week because he's getting the touches. He's in a great offense, but he's just very boom bust. So a fine start, but not a must start.
Yeah, I can't be too confident against this Cowboys defense, which has looked really good. This might not be a high-scoring game. I mean, but you can always put him in as your RB2 or 3 if you need. So a decent start. And then Monday night, we're treated to the Broncos again on primetime television. And they're going to take on the Chargers. So I guess this is all about Melvin Gordon, the revenge game, even though it's been a couple years. So what do you think Gordon does now as the lead back?
I mean, this week you got to feel like pretty okay about him because the Chargers' run defense is horrible. They've given up huge runs pretty much every game this year. I mean, James Robinson, 50-yard touchdown run against them. So I think Melvin Gordon can do something against this defense. Not a must start, but a fine start.
You should feel pretty good about Gordon. If there's a time, this is it. Like you said, Chargers have been gashed on the ground. So I don't really feel like Boone is like a threat to take over work for him necessarily. I think he got a lot of run last week because Gordon put the ball on the ground again. Look, Gordon's always a fumble away from just being in the doghouse, but I feel like he's a strong start this week. If you have him, you should probably roll with him. And then what about Mike Boone? Do you think that he could do something against the Chargers?
Well, this is a tough one because Latavius Murray wasn't active last week, and we don't know if he's going to be active this week. So if Murray's not active, I feel like okay with Boone as kind of like one of those desperation flexes just because the matchup is so good. But if Murray is active, then it's going to really muddle things up, and I'll just sit Boone.
Yeah, Boone is the kind of guy that just screams desperation flex, right? He's not even the starter. Was an afterthought before the Javonte injury. I mean, look, I get it. You've been hit with injuries. You got buys, whatever. You picked him up. Throw him in there. Maybe he makes a big play, scores a touchdown, but don't count on anything coming out of him necessarily. All right, now you have the word on which running backs that should be in or out of your lineup. But don't forget about wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end. We got you covered with our Week 6 playlist for all the fantasy advice you need to win.